They're going to be glorious spaces, and these are not pictures of yours, these are just pictures of innovative learning environments. They're characterised by being highly flexible, that they have a myriad of spaces, not just one particular type. They have the opportunity to allow people to learn in different ways and teachers to teach in different ways at the drop of a hat. They are spaces that are actually intended for students to engage in ways that previously, the argument is, they couldn't in traditional type classrooms. They are in fact wonderful designs, but I have to stress now that the STEM facilities you guys are building and going into are just a building or a room or a space. And the reality is an innovative learning environment is made up of two things. Certainly an innovative design, but even more critically is this notion of innovative practice. So, in other words, what happens inside those spaces is far more important than the design and the affordances that are given to you. So today what I'm going to focus on is teacher practices. You know, education's a fantastic area because there's so much research done on it. And 99% of the research that's done in education is challenged by other educators somewhere along the line. But you know what the one thing that actually all research agrees on? The one thing that we really say, yes, that is the case? That research is overwhelming evidence that the single factor that has the highest impact on student learning is the teacher. So it's teacher practices that are critical, because if we get teachers to use these spaces well, they are going to be the mechanism to help students use them well. Because when you finish spending your millions of dollars and you finish looking at how nice and shiny and pretty they are, you're going to want to say, actually, the only reason why they exist is to make sure the kids learn better. Because I'm sort of, I suppose, being a little bit confrontational in saying getting these spaces into place is only a small part of the job you guys as a group have got to do. Getting to the work effectively, and I know you know this, but getting to the work well is the critical job. Here is an example taken from the newspaper, and there's any number of these around, where these spaces are now being reverted back into traditional classrooms with teachers putting up all sorts of funny things to turn it from being an open plan or whatever back to a traditional space. Why is that? We are spending 4 years now to focus on one thing and one thing only: teachers. How do we get teachers to utilise these innovative learning environments better? In other words, teachers that we work with, majority of them are already really good. And what we have to do is we have to try and convince these teachers that actually if they have a spatial understanding of pedagogy, that actually they can go from being good teachers to even better teachers. Because the one variable that we are actually measuring, the dependent variable in our project, is student deep learning. So if we help teachers to understand the power of the space that they're working within, the potential it holds for them to improve their teaching, if we can get them to understand that, does it mean that students start exhibiting higher levels of deep learning? That's our goal. This is our pathway, the concept. And the dotted line represents the transition from, at the top left-hand side, a school that is just beginning, to the bottom right-hand side, a school that has been in one of these spaces for quite some length of time. Up the y-axis, we have a temporal element. We recognise the fact that there is an early stage, there is a middle stage, and there is a late stage to this transition into the sorts of spaces you guys are building and putting into place. The early stage very much is around getting teachers to articulate that vision. What is it we're actually trying to do in terms of philosophical concept of what this school is about? What does good learning look like? What are we chasing? What do we want it to be? Having said that, you move into the phase where teachers have to start coming up with the idea of an educational brief. How do you tell an architect, or how do you tell a Department of Education actually what it is your particular school wants or needs? Because don't forget, every school is different. Every school has its own particular learning culture according to the community it's within. And sometimes that can be hugely different, sometimes it's only subtle differences. But that educational brief says our spaces have to look like this in order to allow us to X, Y and Z. You're not designing it, but you are putting into place those characteristics you want the designers to respond to, which are the two red things. That's what the designers do. They should come back to your Department of Education or back to your individual school and say, here is our design brief taken from your educational brief. This is our response from a design perspective of the things you guys actually want in the classroom, the sort of learning you want to have it happen in those spaces and how you think it should go about. Then comes the building process, which takes 2-3 years, as we know, and even in your retrofits for your things, you're still looking at a substantial amount of time. The early stage of this particular transition process, when it works well, what's happening is the teachers are actually utilising that time for a phenomenal number of activities, and I'll go into those in the next slide. Then there's the transition strategies. In the old days, architects built a school, brand new school, and they passed the key over. It's what I call the hand over the key and hope concept. Simply by giving the teachers the key to a brand new school, it was expected teachers then walk into it and start using it the way it was intended to be used. This particular model here shows that when it actually works well, the teachers have been thinking about teaching these spaces weeks or months or even years in advance of the place being handed over to them. You then have the occupation stage. There is a halo effect on all research, and particularly in the work that we do here. When you give teachers a brand new space, it's like heaven. Suddenly they've got storage. Suddenly they've got clean floors. Suddenly they've got PowerPoints that work. Suddenly they've got big windows letting in natural light. It's marvellous. If you took a rating then, you would say these places are phenomenally successful. But even so, that is the time where change has to happen, because teachers then are challenged with the reality of actually working in these spaces. Okay, I thought I'd be teaching like this, but I don't think I can, or I can see something over there being more effective than what I thought I was going to do. So you have a high degree of change in the pedagogical approach happening during this occupation period. But the thing that is mostly underrated and under-recognised is that third concept, or the third stage, which is inhabitation, what we call inhabitation. And that is that after you've been living in the place for 3, 4, 5 years, that is the time to have a really solid look at how it's going. And you go back to that very first item there, the educational vision. Is the space that we have designed and built and adjusted our pedagogies to suit, is it actually doing the things back then we said we wanted to do? How does our education brief change now? Now we're 5 years down the track. Has it changed, and should it change, etc.? This is the temporal quality. And as far as the characteristics go, and they're not in any particular order here, I've listed the 14 that came from the data. These are the characteristics that are evident in those schools that are deemed to have made a successful transition from traditional into innovative spaces. And just pulling a few at random, participation in the design process. The schools where it works the best are the schools where teachers who actually teach in those places had a significant amount to do with their conceptualisation and even their design. Certainly through that transition process, they were highly sought after and used. What else is in there? Spatial competencies. That teachers who are able to articulate how space impacts their pedagogies are the teachers who exhibit the characteristics of good transition into these spaces. Questioning of school structures and organisational habits. Don't go any further than your ASMS school here in Adelaide, which, what is it now, nearly 20 years old. It must be heading that way anyway. It was designed specifically as an innovative learning environment. In fact, one of our 6 researchers, Ken Fisher, had a lot to do with that process. But the beauty about ASMS, and we use them all the time, they're partners in all of the research we do, they have been for years. The beauty of ASMS is their teachers have never ever stopped thinking about their practices within that space. I don't know if there's any teachers from ASMS here, but I love visiting your place, and I love talking to your leaders about the challenges that have been put forward to the teaching teams about the space and how can we keep using it. This is a school that's almost 2 decades old, and the buildings are continuing to learn. So it's a whole bunch of things there that actually are these characteristics that we look at. That's where our project is at the moment. I would love to be able to say to you, here is the toolkit for you to use in your spaces. But part of my message is the evidence still doesn't exist. We are in an extraordinarily lucky position in Australia to have the Australian Research Council funding research into this. We are moving faster than anyone in the world. And it's still taking us 4 years to put together something as simple as a bunch of strategies that already exist out in the schools, of collecting them, bringing them together, making sure they are effective and disseminating them into a package that's usable. It's not an easy task, but it's where we're at the moment. I'm hoping that this conversation I've had with you has given you a different perspective perhaps on some of the other things you'll be thinking about. You're much more specific on actually the qualities of your STEM spaces, but the reality is the issues to do with teachers using spaces well is across the board. It's not just in STEM spaces. So it's an area of which we have to do considerable more research.